If you sell by referral, relationship building, and network marketing, pick a time and let's talk about podcasting. You might be surprised. When done correctly, all you have to do is have the conversations. Simply dial 239-351-5575 and ask for Tom. That's 239-351-5575. Or go to lawfirmpodcasts.com to schedule a call.
I'll just note at the beginning of this episode and all of the episodes in this series, some of the things that you may hear will be disturbing or could be disturbing to our listeners. And so I would just suggest that listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the NJ Criminal Podcast.
Welcome back to NJ Criminal Podcast and Part 2 in our series on the death of Tiffany Valiante, which occurred on July 12th of 2015. In this episode, we asked the important question of what happened to the shorts that Tiffany was wearing on the night that she died. We also review clothing and items that were found on the day of the incident, as well as items and clothing that were found in the days, weeks, and months to follow. We discuss the autopsy results, and we review the black box from the train that struck and killed Tiffany. So let's just switch gears for a minute if we can, and let's just talk about the autopsy and what it revealed and how that ties into everything that we've talked about. Again, was there a full autopsy done?
No, there was what they call an external examination. Unfortunately, a rape kit was not used on the torso. But
they do take a DNA sample and they do a toxicology. Now, do we know any details about the DNA sample that was taken?
No, that's the problem. The investigative reports by New Jersey Transit are not detailed as you would see if an investigation had been conducted, say, by the New Jersey State Police or even a local police department. And if I may, the major problem here is that the investigator, the detective from New Jersey Transit Police Department, he brought in right away that this was a suicide based upon the statements of the student engineer that was at the helm and the senior engineer. So on the night in question...
with no investigation, it was declared a suicide.
Yeah, no investigation. Because it was released by someone in the New Jersey Transit Police Department to the media that Tiffany had committed suicide, and it was in the newspapers the following morning. And there was no investigation done. So let's talk about what happens at the scene. So the student engineer says, we were right on top of this person, and the person runs into the train. The senior engineer says, I saw the same thing. Later, they're both put under oath. And
it wasn't that much later. It was 2 days, the 18th of July. So, if I'm not mistaken. And so that would have been within a week.
Yeah, within a week. Right. So the senior engineer, now that he's put under oath by the detective, says, I didn't see anything.
Back was turned.
Yeah. Now, I don't know. I'm just an average layperson. I think if I give false information to somebody in law enforcement, am I potentially subject to being charged?
Well, it depends on whether or not he actually gave that statement, or if we're reading someone else's recitation of what he supposedly said. I don't know if it was even recorded, his initial statement at the scene.
It wasn't recorded, but he signed a card saying that's what he saw.
Right.
So now we have to rely on the student engineer. And there are 3 different versions of what he saw that we could get into later. But what happened was the detective, instead of treating this as potentially a crime scene, accepted it as being a suicide. And therefore, anybody who was walking around the crime scene, they didn't treat it like a crime scene. And I think that is the beginning of the problem that the Valantes had, in that there was not the appropriate investigation. And you mentioned the autopsy. What I have learned, and this is as a lawyer, this is the 3rd suicide case that I've been involved in. So I don't profess to be an expert in this area. I'm just sharing what I've learned as a result of 3 cases. So you do a psychological autopsy.
What is a psychological autopsy?
Yeah. Well, you interview the family. You interview the friends. You get all available medical records. You talk to the teachers at the school. And let me add, ironically, there was a teacher that who was very familiar with Tiffany at her school that happened to be here for a deposition in another case. And when I was escorting the gentleman out, he said, I knew this young lady, and I have to tell you, there's no way that I think she took her own life. And I have to say something to you. And here's what confounds me. It's been 7 years. Wouldn't one person come forward? And let's say they had evidence that it was suicide, that she died by suicide. Wouldn't she come forward so Steve and Diane don't have to suffer anymore trying to figure out what happened to their daughter? Not one person has come forward. And that's what's so troubling. And the problem that we face, and we'll talk about this at the end, is what can the family do now, 7 years later? I have some thoughts about that, but we'll wait to the end.
And we'll just keep going along in our timeline. But I think it's very important to note, and the one thing that troubles me the most is that they never recovered her shorts.
Very troublesome. The question becomes, how thorough was the search by New Jersey Transit Police Department that night and the next morning? Well, all I know is that relatives of Tiffany were out there early next morning, sadly picking up pieces of her body that had not been picked up by New Jersey Transit, and other artifacts, a bracelet and things like that. So because I wasn't able to do depositions in this case, where I could bring everybody here and ask them very specific questions about how the crime scene was handled, I only have to rely upon family members of Tiffany who were out there and said everybody was just walking around.
Right. I want to focus in for a couple minutes on her clothing, because I think that this is an important point to make. We can see from the deer cam photo what she's wearing, and it appears to be blue jean shorts, slip-on shoes, a short sleeve shirt, and a headband. And as I've already noted, her shorts are never found.
Right. And her shoes are never found at the scene.
Well, not at the scene, but her shoes are found later. So her shorts are never found. There is a shirt that is visible in the scene photos, a black shirt I don't know if there's ever been any confirmation as to whether or not that was the shirt that she was wearing. And the reason I asked the question is when I view the photo, it appears to be a long sleeve shirt that's found at the scene, but she clearly was wearing a short sleeve shirt when she left the property. So I had that question for you, and I don't know if there was ever any testing done on that. Secondly, as you noted, the family continued to search the area. And it was not until August 3rd of 2015, which would have been over, what, two, 3 weeks later.
Exactly.
Where Tiffany's shoes, her headband, a sweatshirt, which you never see her wearing, and I'll call it a plastic key ring. It looks like the type of key ring that you get when you take your car in for servicing. It's a handwritten little keychain or key ring, as well as like a decal, are all found down Tilton Road.
Right.
And that, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, was not in the path of the bloodhound. So even if you presume that the bloodhound was accurate, these items, the shoes, the headband, a large sweatshirt with Wilkes on it,
right,
and this key ring and this little decal are found kind of off the path, which raises the question as to whether or not she in fact went a different route to the point of impact. Because again, you took me a couple different ways. And in addition, I noted in the discovery that I reviewed that 4 days after that, August 7th, there is a bloody towel found at some point in the area, not near the shoes, not near the point of impact, but still raising the question, was that ever examined?
The bloody towel was, and because that piece of evidence had not been properly maintained by New Jersey Transit Police Department, Dr. Julie Hennick, who runs the number one laboratory in the United States in Ohio, she called me up and said, the towel is so contaminated because it was kept in a plastic bag, mold develops, and there was no reliability to the testing. That towel, so your listeners understand, if you go to the memorial for Tiffany, it was found as you are coming back from the dirt road onto the street. It was found in that area. That would be on Alo Street. All right. So Uncle Bob found it, and he found it, I would say, the day after the incident in question, and New Jersey Transit took it and held it.
Did anyone ever do any testing, DNA testing on the shoes or on the headband or on this sweatshirt or this key ring, these other items that were found by Tiffany's mom on August 3rd?
All right. Let's talk about DNA testing. All right. I wrote a letter to a deputy attorney general that was representing the interest of New Jersey Transit. And I want to say something. I would not have been able to get as far as I did in terms of getting information and records if it wasn't for the various deputy attorney generals I dealt with. They wouldn't admit it today, but they looked at this investigation and they had the same troubling questions that I have, and I sense that you have. So those individuals did right by the Valiantes. Now, of course, we had to file 4 lawsuits in order to get everything that we were trying to do, but nonetheless, they stepped forward, and the family and I are very appreciative of that. So I wrote a letter to one of the deputy attorney generals, and I said, what did you do with the DNA sample? And did you test it against the evidence? One of which was an axe. And she indicated, I'll find out. And the response was from New Jersey Transit, we don't have to do that. We don't have to take the DNA from her body and test it against the articles, including the axe, because we know it was suicide.
Let's stop. I'm going to stop you right there. Let's talk about the axe. There was an axe found on July 16th, 2022. So it would have been 4 days, 3.5, 4 days after the incident. Where was the axe found and who found it?
The axe, I believe, I'm pretty sure was found by a detective of the New Jersey. Yeah, okay. And it was found from comparing the photos, I would say 20, 30 feet from the point of impact. That would be my best estimation. And
it's listed in evidence, but what you're saying is it has been lost?
Yeah. So, and I'll tell you how this happened. When I'm talking to Dr. Hennick, whose laboratory is doing the testing, I said, well, what were the results with the axe? She said, what axe? We didn't get an axe. That's when I had to contact the Deputy Attorney General. And let me explain why Dr. Hennick wanted to test the axe. If you look at the head of it, there's an orange substance on the head of it and even on the handle. And she said, look, it could be rust, but it could be blood, and we should test it. So they lost an axe. And I keep asking myself, how do you lose an axe? And there's been no explanation offered by New Jersey Transit.
It seems that there should be some way to determine where the break in the chain of custody was. But again, to be clear, it was not located on the night or even the morning of the incident. It was a few days later.
Yeah.
Tiffany was cremated. Does that limit the ability of law enforcement to investigate this case, or are there other things that you think can be done?
No, it clearly puts a limitation on the potential efforts of law enforcement going forward. And let me speak to this cremation issue. Mickey Valiante and Steve Valiante, of all the Valiante brothers, were extremely close. And Mickey, who I interviewed 3 different times, was adamant that the reason he wanted the body cremated was he did not want his brother or sister-in-law to see the remains of Tiffany's body. And that's why he thought that he was looking out for his brother and sister-in-law's best interest. Some people have criticized that he moved so quickly on that. It's not for me to say whether it was right or wrong. I'm just telling you what his position was as to why a cremation was done.
Paul, tell me about individuals that were overheard talking about the incident at a local Wawa. What happened there?
Okay. I remember the day with crystal clarity that one of my legal assistants said to me, there's a gentleman that has some information about what possibly happened to Tiffany Valiante. And he is the manager of a convenience store. And at that point, I said to the legal assistant, I don't want to talk to him. I'll have one of our licensed private investigators speak to him. And I asked Chuck Atkinson, who's retired from the intelligence unit of the New Jersey State Police, to meet with the gentleman and interview him and prepare a report. Chuck did that. And in that report, he states that he overheard 3 individuals saying that Tiffany Valiante was taken by gunpoint and certain events took place.
I'm just going to interrupt you for a minute. How long after the incident, approximately, did this individual come forward? Because it wasn't right away. It was a period of time had gone by.
It was several months. Okay. Several months. I want to say 10 or 11 months off the top of my head. Now, so when I get the report, and I told Chuck, I don't want you to do an extensive interview. Just get the bullet points of it. And if there's something there, then let's have the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office. And I elected to send that statement to the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office, at which time a detective interviewed this individual. We have that interview on video. I suggest he comes across as a very credible individual. To a limited extent, I vetted him by calling people that I know that knew him and said he's a very honorable, straightforward person. So there's no doubt that he heard what he heard. He gave the names of these individuals.
And this was overheard in the store?
Yes.
Is this the Wawa that's close to the tracks at Tilton Road, or is it a different one?
It's the one in Mays Landing. I guess on Route 50, I'm pretty sure that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
Almost to the center of town. Right?
I understand.
Right. So the detective then brought in several individuals. They denied making the statements. They denied that what he was saying ever took place. And I leave it for others that if you look at the transcripts of the interviews of these individuals, it seems that some of the responses to certain specific questions were the same. I don't know if they met ahead of time and came up with a uniform response that they would share with the prosecutor's office, but they all denied it. And the prosecutor's office advised me that there simply wasn't enough to take this matter to a grand jury.
Were any of those individuals at the party or connected to anyone at the party?
2 of them.
And was there ever any follow-up investigation done, to your knowledge, on those individuals after their interviews?
None that I know of. Now, understand something, that, the prosecutor's office told me what the prosecutor's office wanted to tell me.
Sure.
And to this day, I don't know if I have a complete copy of the file of the New Jersey Transit Police Department. The same for the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office. And
they have no obligation to provide it to you. Right.
Precisely.
Right.
Precisely.
So I want to just go back for a minute and talk to you about just kind of itemize in your opinion, the items and the evidence that specifically were mishandled. You talked about the acts. We talked about this key. I'm calling it a keychain. It's a plastic key ring, I guess is a better description of it, with some handwriting on it pertaining to a vehicle. Was there ever any investigation done as to that particular vehicle? Because again, just going back to clarify, that key ring was found at the same time, the shoes, the headband, unknown sweatshirt, and presumably all in the same vicinity?
Yeah. Based upon the file that I received as a result of a court order, There's no indication that New Jersey Transit did anything with those items that were found on Chilton Road.
Are they all still in evidence, as far as you know?
Yes, because after the testing was done at the laboratory in Ohio, it was agreed, and it was so stated in a court order, that everything was sent back to New Jersey Transit.
Except for the axe, because the axe was missing.
Right.
Well, just talk to me again briefly. What testing was done? What were they able to do?
Well, you know, I don't profess to be an expert on DNA testing, and I spoke many, many times to Dr. Julie Hennick, who runs the laboratory, that...
And this testing was done at the expense of the family, correct?
Yes. It's very simple how they charge, $1,000 an item. And the total bill was almost $10,000, which the Valente family borrowed to be able to pay for it. And I'm going to say something about paying. Every person involved in this case, the investigators, Dr. Donald Jason, Louise Hausman, on and on, all the people that looked at this file and critiqued it, including myself, we did everything pro bono just to help the family because it cries out for help. And let me say something to you. I can't tell you the number of retired police officers that over the years came to this office, sat in one of our empty offices, and spent days going through the file and looked at it. And objectively, here's what they say. Anything's possible. We know that. Anything's possible. They said, but based upon the written records and the investigation that we did subsequently, you can't say it was suicide. Right? Now, I, by process of elimination and relying on certain basic premises, okay, I have concluded in my mind that she was the victim of foul play. What that foul play is pure speculation. We have no idea. But and Louise Hausman, who was an investigator for the Atlantic County Medical Examiner's Office, she shared with me on several occasions the discipline that must be applied when trying to analyze this case. And she said there are certain premises, and here's the fundamental one. Based upon everything that I've shared with your listeners so far, and taking over 100 people on the tour, as I did with you, 99% of the people do not believe that she walked there from her home to the point of impact.
And you're saying that because of a combination of the distance, the darkness, no shoes, presumably because the shoes were found at a totally different location, and her fear of the dark.
Yeah, that's it. Now, if you don't want to accept those premises, then you can conclude whatever you want to conclude. But that also, I'm relying upon two dog handlers. One was with the local police department, and one was with the New Jersey State Police. So
that called into question the reliability of the bloodhound.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What about the nature of her injuries? Has there been any discussion or research or investigation regarding whether or not her injuries are consistent with someone who was hit by a train?
You know, it's interesting. You and I have discussed that, and I have two books that you're probably familiar with. It's Medical Legal Investigation by Switzer, right? And they really don't talk about that too much. And in going on the internet over the years, and I was checking my file, there's not a abundance of definitive articles as to what a body will look like after it's been hit by the train. Now,
and the reason I say that is because in reviewing the autopsy, it makes note of, and again, I will apologize to my listeners, and this is difficult for many people to hear, but I think it's important to explain. They were cuts. They were cut.
Yeah.
And so does that also add to your concern that this was not a suicide?
Right. Now, the cuts on the body that are noted in a diagram that was made by the state medical examiner's office makes this case even more problematic. And I want to explain why. The student engineer gives 3 different versions, one of which is in a report, and I'll find as I'm going through the file here as we're talking, and he's quoted as saying by one of the detectives that a certain person jumped out of the woods 13 feet onto the tracks. That's one of the versions. The version on the night in question, we didn't see anything until we were right on top of her and she comes onto the tracks. The third version comes from when he's interviewed under oath, and we have the transcript of that, and he talks about seeing something a half a mile away and then a quarter of a mile away. When I took you to the intersection of the tracks, on the western side of Chilton Road and the bridge that goes over the tracks, the student engineer would not have been able to see anything because of the concrete abutments supporting the bridge. So for him to say, as
there's an overpass.
Yeah,
right.
There's an overpass. And thank you. I complicated it. Okay. So here's what is so interesting in his sworn statement.
And this sworn statement, just for the record, was taken on July 22nd of 2015. So about 10 days after the incident, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. So he says in part, I'm going to quote this, and initially, I at that distance, it was approximately maybe like a half a mile to a quarter of a mile away. It was pretty far away. I couldn't discern what it was specifically. Then he says, as I come closer, approximately a quarter mile away, or a little closer than that, I notice the position in dark. He says, I noticed a human being in a crouched position in dark clothing. Now, this is totally contrary to what he said on the night in question, and then when and as contained in the report of one of the detectives about seeing someone jump 13 feet.
We also says she has dark shorts on, and she didn't have dark shorts. Right.
So here you have a student engineer, and I suspect this was his first time having an encounter like this.
And hopefully his last.
Yeah. And so therefore he is sufficiently traumatized by the event.
Well, we could talk a lot about witness recollection and how things can be skewed when there's a traumatic event. I mean, there are studies done on that. Yeah. I also want to point out, while I'm thinking of it, is there was the black box, so to speak, we call it the black box, for the train was downloaded. And I did look at that. Was there anything in that download that was of significance? I mean, I noted just very quickly that it looks like the horn was blown, and then 4 seconds later the brake was applied. Was that an accurate review?
That was accurate, but as Louise Hausman said, the student engineer said that he rang the bell, and there was no evidence that that had been done.
Is there a bell different from a horn?
Yeah, I thought there was.
Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. And I don't know if that would have been documented in the black box.
I thought there was some indication that the student engineer said that he did something, and I believe the engineer backed them up, but there was no record of it in the black box.
Okay. I had read an article recently that raised that question, and I wasn't sure if that would have been reflected in the black box download. The black box download does seem to suggest that the horn was blown, but again, I don't know if there's a separate bell or whatever that would have been listed. And the other thing, so that was a piece of forensic evidence that was looked at.
Right.
There was a cell phone extraction completed on Tiffany's phone. Was there anything of interest in that was relevant or not?
Well, okay. What we learned is, as a result of a meeting with one of the assistant county prosecutors, they had arranged for the local FBI office to see where this cell phone went.
They can triangulate the location.
Right. And it never left this particular area that we're talking about. That's number one.
So can we presume that it was either dropped or thrown or placed on the ground right when she left the property?
That's the premise that I've been working with. All right. Now, when you look at some of the text messages, there are different individuals, and this really comes from the family, that when they heard Tiffany was missing, people are reaching out to her to get any kind of response. And there is no indication, and this is also based in speaking with the people that telephoned her, that she ever responded to them.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. Was there ever any suggestion or thought on your part that this could have been an incident that was similar to other murders that had occurred in the area? Is that something that you've looked into, or is that just pure speculation at this point?
Well, we have, since the showing of the Unsolved Mystery piece, received an email from a woman that said that she had seen the show and recites a violent act upon her body and how her shoes were taken by the assailant. I don't want to talk too much about that, because what we're doing is we're collecting all of these comments from people, and if somebody in law enforcement is interested, then I want that agency to have the opportunity of interviewing everybody, as opposed to having one of my investigators do that. So we're kind of in a holding pattern.
But the investigation is not open at this point, right?
No.
Right.
And, we're hoping that the appropriate law enforcement agency will decide to open it up. Now, let me tell you what I learned. On the night in question, officers from Galloway Township came to the scene because the incident occurred in Galloway Township. But shortly thereafter, detectives from New Jersey Transit Police Department came to the scene, and according to the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office, the Attorney General's Office and the New Jersey Transit Police Department had primary jurisdiction because it was a New Jersey Transit train and New Jersey Transit tracks. So Galloway said goodbye, and that night the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office was contacted, but a decision was made that there was no need to come out that night. Now, I want to make a comment that I think is really important, especially to your listeners. As we accumulated evidence, we gave it to the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office. On every occasion, they acted on it. They said, okay, we'll reopen the investigation. And that should be known. And secondly, my last meeting in their office is whatever you bring to us that in your mind thinks has some credibility, we will look into it. So
are you asking the public to come forward if they have any information? Is that what the family wants at this point in time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am 100% convinced that there are people that know something. And if you have evidence that is credible, that Tiffany took her own life, I think you have an obligation to come forward and tell the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office that. Or alternatively, if you have information, even though it could be hearsay upon hearsay, I would encourage you to contact the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office. And the reason I say that office is there have been some comments that the violence to Tiffany took place not on the tracks, but some other location. And that would give a basis for the Atlantic County Prosecutor's Office to become involved. New Jersey Transit Police Department has indicated by its silence over the 7 years that it has no desire to reopen this case.
They've deemed it a suicide, and they're not backing on that.
Yeah. And that, let me say something. I know you have a very sophisticated audience. If they were to read the complete file on this case, I'm sure 99% of the listeners would conclude you can't say this was suicide. Clearly, you can't specify the act of foul play, but you can't say it's suicide.
This podcast is not a source of legal advice. No two legal cases are the same. Contact an attorney if you require legal assistance. The best way to follow, subscribe, rate, or message the show is to visit njcriminalpodcast.com. Podcasting is a powerful sales tool with digital marketing benefits. If you're interested in law firm podcasting, simply dial 239-351-5575 and ask for Tom. That's 239-351-5575. Or go to lawfirmpodcasts.com to schedule a call.